What is up, grinders? And K-Raj, what do you call your Vegas insiders? Just insiders or Vinsiders?
Vegas
Vinsiders?
Insiders.
Vinsiders.
Vinsiders.
Okay, what's up, grinders and Vinsiders? Holden Kushner here. We got K-Raj from Vegas Insiders. He's a Vinsider. And, of course, Dan Bach from RotoGrinders. Everybody in RotoGrinders knows Dan. We got lines and lineups. Week number 5. I'm looking forward to this. 5 games, Ravens, Steelers, Vikings, and the Giants will be hitting the Packers, Cowboys, Jacksonville, Carolina, and the Falcons and the Houston Texans as well. K-Raj, first of all, you're looking beautiful today. I love the sign behind you. VegasInsiders.com. Insider, by the way. Insider.com. How'd you do last week, Val?
Hi, Holden. Hi, Dan. 2-2 on the site. I guess we'll go 3-3 if we include all of week 4, because I had the over in the Eagles, Packers, had, for some reason, the Bengals last night. I don't know why I took them. That was stupid. But the other games on Sunday, I really like Tampa Bay. I thought it was a good spot. We talked about on the show last week as far as fading the Rams, not really backing the Bucks. Also had the Titans against the Falcons. The 2 losers I had on Sunday, the Redskins, that just was wrong by a lot, and Denver. I had Denver's my guarantee. I really thought that they would come through against Jacksonville. The Jags had some poor numbers last year off a win, and it looked good at 17-3, and then the rest of the game happened. And unfortunately, they couldn't cover, so we now move on to week 5.
Dan, 2 things. First of all, next week, we're doing week 6 would be next week, right? So it's the Dolphins and the Redskins. I think we need to do 6 games since it's week 6. That's going to be a barn burner. And then something's got to give, right? Unless they tie. And then the other thing is, how was the week in DFS? I mean, I was lucky that the cut line was kind of lower in cash this past week just because a lot of weird things happened. So it was a good week for me in cash. But how'd you do?
I only played tournaments, and it was so-so. I didn't have a ton of Nick Chubb. I kind of avoided the Keenan Allen landmine, but I played Nuke Hopkins instead, and he pretty much stunk up the joint. So I had some decent lineups, didn't win anything dramatic, probably down a little bit overall, but it was a busy weekend for me, with doing some stuff out of town. So it was hard for me to jam stuff in, but I am all aboard this week. I'm ready to go.
Let's do it, baby. And you too, K-Raj. Road favorites. We're going to start with a pair of them here, but we'll start with one game. Ravens, Steelers, Baltimore, 3.5-point favorites. The over-under here is 44, -10. All the game totals are going to be -10. K-Raj, let's start here. The Ravens, the Steelers. Steelers give up some rushing touchdowns. The Ravens, they have given up 6 rushing touchdowns, as a matter of fact. So if there's another week for James Conner to get going, I guess that's coming up. Steelers got their offense going last night. The Ravens offense has struggled, I think, relatively, at least the last 2 weeks compared to what they were putting up the first 2 weeks. Defensively, I don't think either team is really like they used to be, although Pittsburgh showed up last night. So you tell me, Baltimore, 3.5-point favorites on the road in a rivalry game.
Teams off of a Monday night win this year, Holden, are just 1-3. So just put that out there for the Steelers. But also all those games have been low-scoring games. So there's a chance we could have another low-scoring affair here. Obviously with the Ravens, a tale of 2 separate segments of the first quarter of the season, beating the Dolphins and Cardinals, who have a combined 0 wins, all right? Then you lose to Kansas City, who is obviously elite, and then losing to Cleveland, who I think that we were all just waiting for the Browns to turn it around. I don't know about 40 points turn it around, but as far as playing better, which they did on Sunday, and all of a sudden now the AFC North race isn't just Baltimore running away with it, and Cleveland's a huge disappointment. Now the Browns are 2-2, and the Ravens are 2-2, and Cleveland's won at Baltimore. So Cleveland's got to feel good about themselves there. But back to the Ravens. The road team won last year each of these 2 meetings with these 2 rivals. And again, you have no Ben Roethlisberger. You have to put that out there. You have no Flacco in there. Again, obviously with him off to Denver. So some of these things kind of change. And the underdog has covered 7 of the past 9 in the series. I just think with Pittsburgh that when you look back at it, throw out week 1 against New England. All right. They weren't going to beat New England regardless of who was in there. And Ben played, and they just were terrible. Week 2, they hung with Seattle in spite of Ben getting hurt. Week 3, they had 5 takeaways against San Francisco, who right now is the only undefeated team in the NFC, and they were outgained by 200 yards in that Niners game, but had opportunities there, and they beat Cincinnati. I don't care how bad Cincinnati is, still a win at home. I would probably lean Steelers here just because now I feel like the Ravens are kind of going backwards and they're getting a little bit exposed right now. And I think that Pittsburgh, Mason Rudolph, with him getting some more reps and getting some more confidence, that they'd have a shot here as a home underdog.
Dan, I kind of look at this game. It's not like your old Pittsburgh Baltimore games where they just beat the hell out of each other. It seems like there's going to be some offense here. I do like both running games. So give me a little DFS overview here. Your thoughts on Ingram and Connor, and then the passing game for both teams. I'm just throwing it out here. I think he's more of a FanDuel play, but Deontay Johnson now 2 big yardage touchdowns plus 40 yards. He's getting about 6 targets a game from Mason Rudolph. I don't mind this game going over 44, although the unders are 35 and 28 this year. Do you guys know? Nobody wants to bet the unders. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with Lamar Jackson. I mean, he's been one of the best quarterbacks this season. He's the highest priced quarterback on the slate this week with no Patrick Mahomes. But I usually don't spend up at quarterbacks if I don't have to. And in a game total of 42 on the road, I think it's an easy kind of fade spot on Lamar Jackson here. In terms of the running game, Mark Ingram was a dud last week. A lot of people played him on DraftKings. He was one of the highest owned running backs.
Bad idea.
And was a really bad idea. I don't know where they got it from because I didn't see one guy on RotoGrinders kind of tout that guy up. No. But you look at him this week, 5th highest price on FanDuel, but comes in 10th on DraftKings. He's a guy who's got some upside, but I always do worry a little bit with Lamar Jackson being able to steal some of those goal line carries. So 6.3K, it's all right. Probably a tournament viable player on DraftKings. In terms of the wide receivers, again, Hollywood Brown, 5.4 on DraftKings or on I believe FanDuel is probably just too darn cheap here. Once again, 81% of snaps last week. He's only a tournament option, but he's a guy who can easily get like a 50-yard touchdown pass, and it's just a big play waiting to happen. Then the last guy in the Ravens is, of course, Mark Andrews. Tight end is kind of tough this week, and that $4,800 salary on DraftKings, I like a lot better than the $6,100 on FanDuel. So I think he's more of a play there. The real talking point, I think, this week to get into is on the Steelers side, and that's Jalen Samuels. This guy, out of nowhere, I mean, it had 0, I think, touches the week before, and suddenly comes back here on Sunday night or Monday night, 23 DraftKings points, ran a lot of the Wildcat. And, of course, the salaries were out before that game. So he's only $5K on FanDuel with a minimum salary of $4,500, $4,100 on DraftKings. So it's a tough matchup most weeks against the Ravens. But I think he's a guy that you've got to consider as a value proposition because the fact of the matter is nobody saw this coming. Maybe the Ravens are a little bit more prepared for it. But it worked. They won the game. I don't see them stopping giving Jalen Samuels a lot of work here. So he's kind of interesting, I think, on that front. Last thing, Juju Smith-Schuster, I think on DraftKings 6.2K that we like to buy low on guys. This is as low as I've ever seen, but I know the passing game, it's short. They like dinking and dunking down to the running backs, but Juju, man, he's going to score a touchdown sooner rather than later. Might be this week, so I don't hate him at 6.2 or 7.3 on FanDuel.
So because of Samuels, you're off of Connor, even in DraftKings? I mean, 8 targets last night. He caught him.
Yeah. I mean, again, he is in play. I mean, 6.2K over on DraftKings. And the problem is he's only had 13. The most carries he's had in a single game is 13 this season. He's not a bell cow back anymore. We saw Samuels get a bunch of carries, and he didn't do really well on the carries, but also got 8 receptions. So I'm a little bit nervous there. I mean, yes, Nick Chubb had a big game last game, but he also had like a 70-yard run, and I don't think James Conner has the speed to pull that off. So lukewarm on James Conner and what's typically a pretty tough matchup for running backs.
All right, guys, we got our second road favorite here with the Vikings at the Giants, and it's Minnesota, 5.5-point favorites. We got a 45.5 over-under here. So this is interesting, Kevin, because the Giants have looked a lot better. They played the garbage Redskins last week. Daniel Jones did turn the ball over a little bit. The Vikings have a tremendous defense, We got Adam Thielen calling out Kubiak because they're not throwing. All they're doing is running. You can run on the Giants. There's Dalvin Cook. Let's start with a game total on those, because I think that's more intriguing to me than the actual spread. We know the unders are going off here early in the season too. What do you make of 45.5 Minnesota at New York?
I probably lean under Holden because I think that the Vikings defense, when you see what they've done so far, they had one bad half against Green Bay. And past that, they've been very good. And we know the Vikings live off their defense and they run the ball well. And like you mentioned, Kirk Cousins got to get it going at the quarterback position. And Minnesota was shut down by a top-notch Chicago defense last week. You're facing the Giants now, who, yeah, they beat the Redskins. They probably got some confidence there by, holding them to a field goal in that game. But I think that the Vikings, though, they can still find a way to get somewhere in the 20s. And maybe Daniel Jones gets humbled this week, that he faces Tampa Bay, who we saw them in that shootout against the Rams this past Sunday, and they gave up a ton of points against the Giants the week before. So, as far as that's who Daniel Jones has seen, and Washington's been lit up all season. Now you're facing a much better defense in Minnesota, and I just believe that the Vikings can grab this win where this is not going to be a shootout, where Minnesota could win the game 21-10, 21-13, and keep it low scoring under the total.
Well, I think the biggest question here is going to be Daniel Jones and how he goes up against this defense. We've seen him. I love watching this guy run. He's actually a really fun quarterback to watch play the position. He's mobile. He's checking things out here. Here's the problem I got, though. The Vikings defense, and I feel like you can do whatever you want against the Giants defense if you have enough talent. And if they finally decide to open up the playbook, then boom. I think, Thielen could have a big day. Diggs could have a big day. And, the Vikings, though, 5.5 points on the road, that I don't feel comfortable with. That I'm on a pass right now.
Yeah, and it's tough because we saw the underdogs come through last week, and even Detroit and Buffalo covered as home underdogs and losses, and we saw other underdogs come through. So maybe now, people playing the underdogs, you could be a little scared that, will it turn back and the favorites come back? Road teams have done very well this year against the number. And when you look at the Vikings, they flipped from I know close at a pick'em, but now a close at a pick'em in the Chicago game last week. But now as a favorite coming in this week on the road, the Vikings have fared well recently as a road favorite. 6-1-1 straight up, 6-2 ATS their last 8 opportunities. So when they're laying points on the road, usually they take care of business, and it goes back to that old thing about Kirk Cousins, that when he plays teams beneath him, he's going to fare well. And when he plays teams on his level or above, like Green Bay and Chicago, he's going to struggle and they're going to lose. So obviously it falls into the first category, playing the Giants, who the Vikings are just better than. And the Giants, they did win and cover as a home favorite last week against Washington. As a home underdog, just 2-5 straight up, and against the spread the last 7 at MetLife. That win against the Redskins last week was a rare one for them at home. And we saw them lose to Buffalo back in week 2. Granted, it was with Eli. But the Giants have had their problems at MetLife Stadium, and now playing a team that's on paper better than them, it could spell problems for the Giants.
So, Dan, here's the deal with the Vikings and the Giants. Giants are giving up about 3.9 yards per carry. They've allowed the opponent get in the end zone 5 times. Dalvin Cook can beat anybody. He even had some garbage time points last week. I know there's probably some positions you want to start at, but for me, the biggest question is going to be, what am I doing with Dalvin Cook this week?
I probably am not playing him as much as you might want to. I think I'd rather play Zeke Elliott, who we'll talk about a little bit later.
I'm with you on that, man. I'm with you.
Christian McCaffrey. So we'll talk about those guys. And I think the other reason is very simply, just look at this Giants team. They've been pretty solid against the run so far this season. Not great, but the passes where they've absolutely been hammered. 4th most fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. So, I'm a big believer in the squeaky wheel narrative. And we saw last week Adam Thielen basically throw Kirk Cousins and the offensive coordinator under the bus. And there's no doubt in my mind that those guys are going to be a bigger part of the game plan. They need to be. They're two of the better receivers in the league. So I'm 100% buying Diggs and Thielen this week. Diggs is really cheap, $6K on FanDuel, 6.2 on DraftKings. Thielen under 7 on FanDuel and 6.7 on DraftKings. So I love the wide receivers. And then it boils down to whether you believe, like K-Rod just mentioned, Cousins, this is a blow-up spot for him. He has those games against bad teams where he goes off, and he is super cheap out there. 5.3 on DraftKings, 6.8 on FanDuel. I love him for tournaments. I love stacking him with those wide receivers. I think this is a get-right spot for this Vikings offense, this Vikings pass game, and I actually like them to cover that 5 points rather easily. On the other side, Daniel Jones, I mean, I think the fact that this is his third game is just more beneficial to the defense. You got more tape on the guy. You know what he can do. And we saw him kind of struggle last week against a team that's really not that good. So the one guy I would consider is maybe Wayne Gallman. He looked pretty good in that game last week, 2 touchdowns, only 5.4 on DraftKings, and he did have 7 targets and 6 receptions. So a full point PPR guy like him, that's the spot you want to play him. And then Evan Ingram, he's fine. Again, tough week for tight ends, but I look at Andrews, he's 1K cheaper than Ingram on DraftKings, so I'd prefer him over Ingram. And then Ertz is only 300 more on FanDuel. So I think there's other targets I prefer over him, but maybe if you want to run a run back with your Viking stack, I wouldn't hate him as a tight end.
We got Golden Tate coming back too, and
yep.
he's not had a lot of work with Daniel Jones, just a little in the preseason. But here's the question, because I love Evan Ingram, in season long, but we're talking DFS here. Sterling Shepard has been the number one option, if you ask me. So I just have some question marks about this passing game. How much does Golden Tate get worked in? Is he a GPP option? So that throws a little wrinkle into this one, Dan.
Yeah, it does. And especially when FanDuel screws up their salaries and makes him min, he's the floor, 4,500. So, I don't even know if he's a free square there, because I could absolutely see a scenario where he catches like 3 passes for 27 yards and that doesn't help you out that much. But absolutely in tournaments, absolutely in a run back situation with Vikings. In an island, maybe you could get cute with it because he's so cheap and he'll open up, stud running backs and maybe a wide receiver or two, which look pretty good this week to rebound. So I don't hate him on FanDuel. I probably need to see it first to pay the price on DraftKings.
Let me just say the last thing, because I'm going to be going back and forth on Dalvin Cook all week long. They faced Zeke Elliott coming off of the holdout. They faced Buffalo with Frank Gore, and then Devin Singletary tore him up. They faced Tampa Bay, where they shut down Peyton Barber, but Ronald Jones tore him up in just very little work. And Washington didn't have a run game. So I'm really intrigued by that this week, and it'll just be a GPP option, but Dalvin Cook to me is fascinating.
He's a stud. I mean, he is a top 5 running back in the league. So those type of guys, it's just whether or not it's a blow up spot, whether or not it's, 3 touchdowns. And if you don't play him, you're not winning a tournament. I don't think that's the case for him this week. He's going to be fine. You can probably even play him in your cash games and be okay. I just don't know if it's a tournament winner, just because I think the game flow is going to run through that pass game. And this is their opportunity to get right after just a brutal matchup last week versus the Bears.
All right, K-Rods, let's get to our next game here. We got the Packers at the Cowboys. This is the 425 window, so it's going to be a game which is all over the country. Dallas, 3.5-point favorites. We got an over-under sitting at 47, -10 in most places. Dallas, coming off Sunday night, they didn't look great, but New Orleans is a tough place to play. I'm not very concerned about them. My question is, the Packers going to be able to keep up with them on the road, because the Packers blew up offensively this past week, but they still have not really impressed me. You've got Devontae Adams down. Can they stay within 3.5 here? Can they cover the 3.5, given that I think their offense could be a little bit down and their defense going to have to hold into here?
I think they can. And you look at what Green Bay has done against Dallas over the years, and granted they didn't play last season, but the Packers have won 4 of the past 5 meetings with the Cowboys, including 2 close wins in Arlington. One of those, the playoff victory a few years ago, and I believe it was Dak Prescott's first time in the playoffs when Aaron Rodgers hit that pass down the sideline and Mason Crosby kicked the long field goal. And the Packers, second time they're an underdog this year. The first time was against Chicago back in week 1, where they won 10-3. And again, guys, it goes back to the Cowboys, and you say the first 3 weeks you didn't play anybody of substance. Then you played the Saints, even though Drew Brees wasn't there, but Teddy Bridgewater did what he had to do, and the Saints held the Cowboys down. And now Dallas plays another quality team. They're obviously not playing a team like they did the first 3 weeks. They're playing one more New Orleans class. And for Green Bay, a couple extra days off here after the Thursday night game, where I don't think it's totally shocking Philadelphia won and the Eagles tried, or at least somewhat got back on track. But I think here getting some points with the Packers, and Dallas goes from 3-0, top of the world, to they could be 3-2 that quickly. And the winner of Rams and Seattle Thursday is 4-1. If San Francisco wins Monday, they're 4-0. So really, it's a must-win game for both of them. But for Green Bay, I do think that a few extra days off, and they still scored points, like you mentioned, Holden. Even though the defense got a little tore up in that game, they still got some points. So that's a little bit of a positive for Aaron Rodgers. I think that this could end up being a very close game, but I'd probably side with the Packers.
I just don't know what the offensive identity for the Packers is yet. Like, they're trying to run. You've got Aaron Rodgers, he's still at the top of his game. Defensively, they are a better team, even though they didn't show it last week. So it's very unpredictable to me what we're going to find out of the Packers. And for the Cowboys, I'm glad you brought it up, because it was Swiss cheese schedule the first 3 weeks. They had a rough one on the road, but they're going home to play, and 3.5 points, I guess, is the hook that's got me a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, and look, should Dallas be favored at home? Definitely. Like, there's no question about it. Like, this is right, which makes it so tough that I don't know. Dallas covers this game. Okay, wouldn't be a surprise. And it's like we talked about last week with the Packers and Eagles. I think no matter how it ends, I don't think is a huge surprise. That's why this is one of the tougher games in the schedule. And like you mentioned, Holden, it's the 4:25 game. It's the Buck Aikman game on Fox. So, a lot of people will be focused on this, but I just don't know in the grand scheme of things if this is the best game to even bet on. You want to watch for entertainment purposes in a sense with these two teams. Fine. You got two great quarterbacks. Fine. But I just think that there are probably better games on the board, because this one can really go either way.
All right, so Dan, from a DFS perspective, Rodgers, Prescott, you've got Jamal Williams, who's probably not going to play this week. Aaron Rodgers should get a big workload. Same thing with Ezekiel Elliott. The question is the wide receivers for the Packers, because Adams likely is gone. We're taping this on Tuesday. I mean, he's not going to play. So you got Valdez-Scantling. They wanted to get Jimmy Graham involved more last week. They got him more involved. So I think that's an option again. Geronimo Allison too. And on the flip side of things with Dallas, it's Amari Cooper. We're waiting for Michael Gallup to come back. Jason Witten has a floor, I guess. Every week he's going to, get you 4 catches 50 times. Huh?
Don't play Jason Witten.
I'm not saying. I'm just throwing it out there. The guy has a floor at least. His floor
want a floor. We want a ceiling.
Well, in a tournament we do. In a tournament, you're just all turn. I'm just very risk averse. So I play a lot more cash. Anyways, I think there's a lot of. Huh? Don't put him in. I won't either. I haven't even checked out his salary. It's probably not good, is it? Yeah, Witten, 3,800. I mean,
no, don't do it.
We're not going to do that. Okay, so from a DFS perspective, I gave you a little outline. Dig in.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because the Packers defense has kind of turned into a little bit of a run funnel. I mean, if you look at the fantasy points allowed, they are number 1, or I guess it would be number 31, depending on how you look at it. Basically the toughest in terms of wide receiver fantasy points allowed, and second in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. So they've been really, really tough there. But on the flip side, the second most yards and the most touchdowns, third most fantasy points allowed to running backs. This basically really sets up well as a Ezekiel Elliott smash spot, especially after last week where he just put up a dog of a performance. And I love taking running backs off of those situations. We saw with McCaffrey after his horrible game on Thursday night. He bounced back strong. I think Elliott scores twice here. Last week I gave you Devontae Adams as kind of the smash of the week. I think it's Ezekiel Elliott in this spot. So love him. Dak, I think he's a pass, like I mentioned. Second highest price quarterback on FanDuel, 8th on DraftKings. So no thank you. I'm going to look somewhere else. As terms of Green Bay, kind of hinges on news. Like you said, I doubt Adams is going to play. And if he does sit, MVS is a guy who historically is kind of picked up, and he's only 5'6" on DraftKings, 6'3" on FanDuel. So I think he'll be somewhat popular if Devontae Adams is ruled out, as we expect him to. And I don't hate the idea of Aaron Jones here. Like you mentioned, the identity of this Green Bay team still kind of in flux. A lot more running than we've seen historically. Don't love the 6'8" on FanDuel, but 5,900 on DraftKings. He had 6 receptions last week. I don't mind that play at all. And, Rodgers, no thank you for me. I think there's other quarterbacks to play. That Jimmy Graham guy that you pointed out, again, if you want to go sneaky at tight end, nobody really likes to play him. And again, he gets a ton of usage there in the red zone. So don't mind that call. Don't hold.
He's priced up.
Play him over Jason Witten, please.
Thanks for going on a limb there, Dan. Appreciate it.
Hey, I'm just trying to help you.
I'm just throwing guys out. That's it. I need to elicit a reaction from you, and I obviously got one saying Jason Witten. We'll figure out who else I can tilt you with. Jimmy Graham's at 4,300, by the way. To me, more of a cash play than anything else. I really do. I think that he's going to have to be a big part of the offense. They wanted to get him involved last week. Dallas does not do a good job of covering the tight end. This Jimmy Graham, I think, is fine.
I can get behind that.
He's fine. I don't see a big ceiling, but I do see a floor. Okay, so we got Packers, Cowboys. And yes, you know why Ezekiel Elliott, they're giving up 5 yards per carry, the Packers are. They're going to get gashed by Zeke. 1:00 game, Jacksonville at Carolina. How did I know? K-Raj, we're doing a show with Dan Bach, and he had to have Jacksonville in here. Which, by the way, they were out here in Denver, and that was wonderful. Once again, the Broncos, when they win, we get a free donut from our local King supermarket, and my daughter is so pissed off because they're 0-4. She's a 4-year-old. She cries every time they lose. It's not the same when Daddy buys it because it's not free. Everybody loves free stuff. I bought her a donut yesterday. She's like, it's just not the same. It's not as good as a free one. Jacksonville, Carolina, K-Raj. Let's get into this here. Panthers, 3.5-point favorites at home, 41.5 game total. Minshew magic is real. He brought him back. I don't expect Leonard Fournette to run for 200-plus yards. That's just the Denver defense being as bad as it was. Low game total. Panthers going to have to cover by 4 at this point. Give me a little rundown here, K-Raj. Who you liking?
I'll give you this first number, guys. 5-0 ATS. You say, what is that? That's the combined record against the spread of Gardner Minshew and Kyle Allen as starting quarterbacks.
Woo!
So those two. Well, here's what's interesting is, everyone has gone into this. Well, look at all these quarterbacks that are out: Roethlisberger, Drew Brees, Cam Newton, Nick Foles. Even though Nick Foles barely played for the Jags, and yet Kyle Allen's 2-0 against the spread. Minshew's 3-0 against the spread. Bridgewater's 2-0 ATS as a starter because we're not going to count that Rams game. Daniel Jones is 2-0 against the spread. The only guys that have struggled have been Josh Rosen 0-2 and the Jets with Trevor Siemian and Luke Falk going 0-2. But past that, all these teams with their quote-unquote backup quarterbacks have actually fared well. So now we have this game this week where we'll see if Jacksonville can do it again on the road. They dug themselves that 17-3 hole against Denver last week, and they came back. You mentioned Fournette and how well he ran the ball, had that 81-yard run to help Jacksonville come back. Now for Kyle Allen, this is an interesting spot that he was an underdog the last 2 weeks against Arizona and against Houston, and now he's flipped to the favorite role. And understandably, this is not a fair stat to throw out because this has nothing to do with Kyle Allen. It has everything to do with Cam Newton, that the Panthers 1-7 against the spread their last 8 as a favorite. Now, that includes the Tampa Bay game back in week 2 in which Kyle Allen didn't play, and the rest of those losses came last year. So we can't put that on Kyle Allen. But also, I would probably side with Carolina here, just thinking what Jacksonville has done, where they should have beat Houston on the road. They beat Tennessee handily on that Thursday night. and they come back and beat Denver. Now 3rd in 4 weeks on the road for the Jags, maybe asking a little too much for Carolina. I think has a little bit of momentum now after the 0-2 start, and I think going on the road was helpful. And you know what? If Cam Newton's beat up, get a healthy quarterback in there. They did that with Kyle Allen, and McCaffrey bounced back after the tough week 2 against Tampa Bay, so he's kind of back now. I think that Carolina can cover the short number.
Hey, let's be very clear here. Kyle Allen was not very good last week. Okay, I mean
he won a road game, Dan.
The defense won the road game.
All he does is win. All he does is win.
I mean, I think this is a fascinating game. I mean, I think it's going to be low scoring, and the total's 41.5. And I don't think there's a ton of big DFS options for us outside of Christian McCaffrey, who's just an absolute usage hog.
How about DJ Chark? He had a touchdown call back last week. I mean, I love DJ Chark now.
Well, we'll get to him. I mean, it's interesting here, but I think Carolina's defense is pretty legit. I mean, last week I thought at home that was going to be a spot for the Houston Texans to get going, and they absolutely neutralized DeAndre Hopkins. And when you take him out of the game, they don't have much else. And really good coaching by them last week. And I look at the Jags here. Yeah, we've got Leonard Fournette. I mean, he plays like 95% of the snaps, and he looks a little too cheap on DraftKings at 6,400, even on FanDuel at 69 for the volume he's going to see. But I just worry about whether or not we want to play a guy and the team total below 20 fantasy points here. So that's my concern with him. Now, the wide receivers, you're right. Chark, great number of looks here, 5.8K. But actually, Dede Westbrook has the same number of targets. And even on DraftKings, Dede Westbrook is more expensive than DJ Chark, which is shocking to me when I saw that. 5.3 to Chark's 5K. But the play in this one, I think on both sides, is the defense. The Jags, 3K on DraftKings. The Carolina Panthers, 2.6K on DraftKings. I think you can go with either side of that. And then one sneaky play maybe from the Carolina side. And we got to see whether or not Jalen Ramsey plays. But Samuel, he's a GPP flyer for me. He was 3rd in the league in air yards last week, and he is coming in at 4.5K. So I think he is kind of a deep flyer in GPPs this week, a guy who can have a big game. If he cashes in on some of those deep passes, just really takes one at 4.5, and you've got it made. So I like the defenses and maybe a wide receiver from Carolina. That's it.
So let me ask you this: if they were priced the same on both sites, would you go McCaffrey or would you go Zeke Elliott?
I'd go Zeke Elliott this week. Not think twice. I think Zeke is a total smash. I could see the Jags really focusing in on doing their best to stop McCaffrey here. And I know that most teams might do the same, but especially with what they saw in Kyle Allen last week, I mean, they're going to get pressure on this kid, and he did not deliver. It was just all McCaffrey. I think they're going to sell out, do everything they can, spy him the best they can, and slow him down a little bit. And again, McCaffrey, a huge number of touches last week. That's just so hard to be sustainable week after week. So I'm not saying I'm not playing McCaffrey, but I definitely like Zeke Elliott better.
Remember the preseason when they said we're going to give him the same amount of touches, we're just going to get him off the field a little bit more? Things change. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Real quick, K-Raj, one more time, I may have just missed you say this, 41.5. It's just about as low as a total you're going to get.
Yeah, and after the Jags have had a couple of defensive performances the last few weeks, they held down Houston back in week 2. They held down Tennessee in week 3, and after a bad first half, they were great in the second half defensively, except for that last-minute touchdown. But after Jacksonville and Denver went over that total of 37 last week, and the total now around 41 this week in Carolina. I probably pass on it, but you see that Jacksonville, I mean, at times they can explode a little bit, which they did last week. And for Carolina, like Dan mentioned, Kyle Allen did take a step back last week against obviously Houston's much better than Arizona, but he was assisted by the Cardinals defense being terrible back in week 3. I still got to give him credit for that victory, but now, Jacksonville's a really good defense, and probably lean more under simply because Now going back home, I think a little bit of pressure now back at home after being on the road the last 2 weeks. So leaning under there with Jacksonville and Carolina.
All right, let's start with the game total, and then I'll get your breakdown of the game after we go to Dan Bach. I kind of want to wrap it up with you today. 49 is the total here. Falcons at Houston. Dan Quinn, it's been a disaster there with Atlanta. Houston, on the other hand, I mean, I have not been impressed with their offense. They've had a couple of nice games, the one against New Orleans. There have been 2 down games too, where they've been neutralized. And it's a high total. Anybody could see it going both ways. I think if you just looked at the 2 teams on reputation and through the past, it's going to go over. But I've not been impressed with this Houston offense. They don't have a good running game. They become completely one-dimensional. And for the Falcons, Matt Ryan, I think will have a day here, and the Falcons will put up some points. But will it be enough combined? As the Texans are -5 too. That's a number.
Have we seen a greater fall from a franchise than the Falcons up 28-3 on the Patriots and then losing that Super Bowl and then just everything just going downhill? I mean, that fast. I know they beat the Rams the next year in the playoffs, but still, I don't understand this Atlanta team where you have Matt Ryan, who's an MVP. Devontae Freeman's numbers have just gone in the toilet. Julio Jones is still pretty solid, but I just don't know what's happened to Atlanta. Now, I'll give you these numbers, guys, as far as the Texans in the first half this year. Against New Orleans in the opener, they scored 14 points in the first half. Okay, good. The last 3 weeks, the Texans in the first half have scored a combined 16 points. So they have gotten off to slow starts the last few weeks. And you talk about the offense that, Deshaun Watson may have his moments, but past DeAndre Hopkins, not a lot there to go to. And they lost Lamar Miller, before the season with the knee injury. So the Texans, I don't know where they're really trying to find their offense at. And as far as Atlanta goes, they've just been a bad road team, a bad road underdog, 1-8 against the spread their last 9. Let me ask Holden a question. Who was that win against in that 1-8, the Falcons, over the last year and a half? Look behind you.
The Dolphins.
Look behind you.
Oh, anybody that we talk about bad teams, let's just go with the Redskins.
Correct. The Redskins.
That doesn't count. That doesn't count.
Come on. You got it on the second guess. But the Redskins, that's the only team they've beaten as a road underdog, and they were a 1-point dog in that game. So, this is one of those games where, it's so funny. We talked about Atlanta, Tennessee last week, and you don't know what to expect from the Titans. You don't know what to get from the Falcons either. And you would think the Falcons would try to rebound this week. But honestly, it's just one of those puzzling games out there. As far as the total goes, I would just go under because I don't trust Houston's offense to bust out anytime soon. We saw Atlanta with an over against Indianapolis 2 weeks ago when they played another AFC South opponent on the road. But the Falcons, I can't trust. The Falcons actually shut the Titans out in the second half last week, if that means anything. They gave up a couple big plays, but I'd stay under. It's just some of these teams, guys, you have 13 2-2 teams in the NFL. Now, granted, only one of these teams we're talking about is 2-2. So there's just so many teams you just cannot figure out even 4 games in.
So, Dan, Matt Ryan, maybe looks like he's in a good spot on the road here. Deshaun Watson, I don't know what to expect out of him, really. I mean, we need him to run some more. Hopkins has not had has DeAndre Hopkins been worth the first-round pick so far? No, absolutely not. And I think it's translated to DFS since week 1. He just hasn't been there. I think a lot of the big names that we're talking about in these games have been off so far, with the exception of Julio Jones, who's just back to being number 1.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of disagree a little bit with your guys' kind of lukewarm nature here on the Texans offense. I mean, Carolina's a tough defense. They lead the league in sacks. Jacksonville, one of the best defenses out there, especially when you've got, Jalen Ramsey just shutting down DeAndre Hopkins. I think this is a smash spot here for the Texans to get right. Again, Watson has not looked great. I get it. But Atlanta, they just gave up ridiculous yardage and fantasy points to Marcus freaking Mariota, Corey Davis, and A.J. Brown. I mean, what makes you think that they're going to be able to slow down Deshaun Watson, Nuke Hopkins, and Will Fuller? I don't think it's going to happen. I think this is a get-right spot for those 3 guys. I mean, this is a defense that leaves a lot to be desired, and we saw it last week. I think Fuller is super sneaky. I mean, he's a guy who had just barely missed on a 75-yard touchdown last week. He's only 4.5 on DraftKings, 5.7 on FanDuel. So I really like him kind of by himself, but I think, man, I love this Texans offense to get going this week. Even Duke Johnson. I mean, the one thing we can say with Atlanta is they've really struggled stopping pass catching running backs. And that's what Duke Johnson does. He's 4.2 on DraftKings, only a deep tournament flyer for me, but a guy who this feels like a spot maybe where he can get going. Now, the Atlanta side, I mean, Julio Jones, he's the number 2 priced wide receiver behind Hopkins. And yeah, you would love to be able to go some Julio, some Hopkins, and some Deshaun Watson. And I hope this game just goes absolutely crazy like we saw with that Rams and Bucks game last week. If you had that stacked up, you pretty much won all the money. I'm not sure this is going to get to that magnitude, but you got the playmakers to potentially make it happen. And there is a little bit of value out there if you trust a guy like Jalen Samuels or maybe even that wide receiver for who we talked about earlier, the Giants.
Golden Tate.
Yeah, min salary. So there's a way to get there. And, Ryan, the thing about him is I think he's pretty terrible, but he's 5.9K in a game. They should be passing a lot. 9th ranked quarterback on DraftKings. He's 5th on FanDuel. So you can know where I prefer to have him. And then the last point I want to make is the Texans actually have allowed the most receptions to running backs this season. So on DraftKings, I don't hate in tournaments taking a look at Devontae Freeman. Kind of got going a little bit last week, had 9 targets, and he's been top 10 in the league in targets and receptions as a running back. So this seems like a spot based on the matchup. Maybe he can reach the end zone. Hasn't happened yet, but all in all, I like this as a game stack, like a lot of pieces of it.
Yeah, I just think that the Houston secondary is a complete disaster too. I think that's been overlooked. And the big question in this one for me is, can Calvin Ridley get back on track? The last 2 weeks he's been bothered. I think it's a hip. He has not been productive whatsoever. If there is a week for him to break out, if you have Matt Ryan stack, I think he's got to be involved in that some way somehow. And I think you kind of treat him like Will Fuller, right? Will Fuller has not had a blow up game. We'll see if this one could go. And
he's 4.9 real quick on DraftKings. So like he and Fuller are kind of in that same mid-tier range of one of the higher total games on the slate. I actually think that's a great call there. Much better than Jason Witten.
I didn't call Jason Witten. I brought his name up that he had a floor.
I heard him referenced. So
fine. You think the Jaguars are going to win the Super Bowl? I think that, I think Witten's going to have a floor here. So, K-Raj, I want to finish on this game with you here. Falcons in Houston. How do the Falcons keep up with Houston on the road, given how much of a disaster they have really been, especially defensively this year? Is 5 points too much?
I mean, the Lions moved up, and Houston opened up as a 4.5-point favorite at the Westgate. It's up to 5. And the problem with Atlanta is, you can't trust them at home, it feels like, 'cause they lost to Tennessee last week. You can't trust them on the road. And, you go to the Texans side of things, and look, at least defensively, what they've done at home this year, they've held Jacksonville and Carolina down. And you can argue that now they're facing the best quarterback out of the 3 in Matt Ryan. They got Minshew in his first start, and they got Kyle Allen in his technically 3rd start of his career. And now you're getting a guy like Matt Ryan. So it's just so tough because of the numbers the Falcons have had on the road have been so terrible. But, also Atlanta has lost to Minnesota this year. They had kind of a no-show in that week 1. And Indianapolis, they fell into a hole early. They came back, but then couldn't. The problem is the Falcons have not been consistent in any game this year. Even the Eagles game in week 2, the only game they won, it was a bit back and forth, and the Eagles had guys beat up. Wentz got hurt, and yet Atlanta still needed that late Julio Jones touchdown. I mean, they're a few plays away from maybe being 0-4, at this point. But it's just a very tough game, this Atlanta-Houston game, because, you want to be able to make the argument for Atlanta and say, okay, now you're getting points with them on the road. That is this the spot after they put up a dud against Tennessee and Marcus Mariota last week? It's just
you don't seem very comfortable in in that.
I don't. In this game, Dan, it's just I don't. Because you know what? I don't want to trust. I always say like this is one of those games. You feel dumb either way of taking it. That you take Atlanta and they lose and then they'll cover. Like, see, I told you the road numbers aren't good. But then you take Houston. Oh, this was the week Atlanta was finally going to break out. That you knew this was the week. Matt Ryan's going to throw for 350 and Julio Jones is going to have 150 yards receiving. And this was the time to do it. So that's just where I just don't feel comfortable much with this game.
Well, I like the over a little bit right now. I do. I think that the secondary for the Texans is bad enough, and the Atlanta defense is just bad enough. There's a lot of offensive weapons. Hopefully this is the blow-up game this week. I don't know if we're ever going to see – man, are we going to see another Rams-Tampa Bay game this year where they're putting up 90 points?
Of course. It'll happen. I don't know if this is it, but it'll happen. I mean, that's why you stack games up in DFS right there.
95 points. What was it? It went over 90? They hit 100?
The under 90, you lost.
If you went under 90, you lost. Hey, guys, any other thoughts about this slate? Any other teams? Again, week 6, next week, it's the showdown. Thanks for reminding me, K-Raj. Dolphins and Redskins. Bill Belichick said he's preparing for a really good football team this week. So I'm surprised that line is not 20 or 21 at this point.
Such a liar. Just can we come out and just be honest and say, you know what? We're going to show up. They stink. Like, we got this. Can we just do that instead of they're a good football team? They suck. Like, come on, Bill, get out of here with that. I'm so tired of these guys. Or Brady's probably going to say, Dwayne Haskins, stop it. Just stop it already. Just come out and tell the truth for once, liars.
Any interest in that game? New England and Washington, Dan? Could you even play anybody from the Patriots just because it could be such a debacle?
Yeah, there's just too many, too. I mean, that's the problem. They've got like 4 running backs. They're using like 4 wide receivers. Ben Watson, I think, comes back this week. So he's not even mid-salary. You still even have to pay $3,700 for him over on DraftKings. So I'll tell you the storyline I'm interested in fantasy this week, though, is what does Melvin Gordon do? This is his first week back. We saw Denver get gashed last week by Leonard Fournette on the ground. I mean, if I set the line at 15 carries, would you take the over or the under on Melvin Gordon this week?
Under.
I think so too.
I think he's Justin Jackson this week. Okay. Troy Maine Pope. My big concern was that if he did play, and that's only if Pope would have been injured, or Eckler, that he would have stolen the goal line carries. That was my big concern. Last week, he never got into the game. Before the game, they said it was an emergency. I wasn't worried about it. I actually think Austin Eckler is going to be a great play again this week.
Yeah,
love Austin Eckler.
He's cheaper than Melvin Gordon is on DraftKings. So
he's very affordable. 67.
People will be afraid of playing him with Melvin Gordon there, and he's got such a high ceiling in the pass game alone that I think he's probably still a value. I mean, he was $8K last week, $7,200 the week before. So 6,700 is way less than you've been paying for Austin Eckler. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's something to keep our eye on for sure.
I think Eckler I will be overweight on Eckler everywhere. It could come back and burn me, but the Denver run defense is as bad they're as bad against the run as anybody is as bad against any position in any football game this week, any week. They give up 300 yards rushing almost to the Jaguars. Are you kidding me? They're going to get gashed by Eckler. Eckler can have 15 touches. He's still going to pay off the 6,700. Hey, Kevin, we did our 5 games. Any games that you're feeling really good about this week?
Well, I'll give you one. It's not a game total, or it's not a game play. It's more of a half play. Arizona in the first half of this season, guys, 0-4 against the spread.
Ooh.
So they have not covered at all. They fell behind early to Detroit, fell behind early to Baltimore. In week 3, they fell behind against Carolina, and this past week against Seattle. They've been terrible in the first half this year. 3-1 in the second half. So Cliff Kingsbury, he gets his hair gel and the sunglasses at halftime. He looks in the mirror and somehow makes an adjustment for the second half. But they're going to Cincinnati this week, which another dog game. Both teams looking for their first win. But Cincinnati's laying 2.5 in the first half. The Bengals have played 3 of their first 4 games on the road. So you kind of wonder now, if they could maybe get back on track at least early. probably ride that trend, take the Bengals in the first half coming up on Sunday. It's just hard to ignore that Arizona has just struggled early. And I don't know what that is, or if Kyler Murray is able to play better in the second half. But with the Cardinals, it's just a tough thing to overlook their slow starts.
All right, guys. Dan, what do you want to plug here? Sharpside app, RotoGrinders Sports Betting.
Yeah, all that stuff, of course. I mean, Sharpside, if you're not in the Vegas Insider contest, don't feel like it's too late. Again, we've got weekly prizes for that, and it's a whole lot of fun to kind of track your bets. And you can get a lot of great prop bets as well within the app. So if you haven't downloaded it, free for iOS and Android, free to play. And check us out, rotogrinders.com. Again, if you're watching us on VI and you're like, maybe I'll try this DFS stuff, well, there's no better place to go. I mean, we already have one contributor win $1 million. And then last week on FanDuel, another one of our guys finished 4th. So we were like right knocking on the door for another $1 million win. And I'll tell you what, all this information, the tools, it's going to make your life easier. It's just so easy to be building lineups now compared to what it used to be. So check it out, rotogrinders.com if you're watching us on YouTube or on VI.
K-Raj. Just turn around, look at that big, beautiful banner that you have.
Hey, that's a better looking banner than what we saw last.
No,
week.
I agree.
I think we need to stop mocking K-Raj for his banner.
I'm not mocking him. Why do people always think I'm not being facetious here?
You mocked him last week.
Last week I did because it was a disaster. Okay. This week he looks amazing. He looks like he's at the Taj Mahal of sports betting.
I am. I really am.
All right, guys, take care of yourself. This has been another edition of Lines and Lineups, and we will catch you for week 6. And good luck, everybody, unless you're playing me.